question revolves around a potential violation of the National Electrical Code Section 225.33, often referred to as the six-handle rule, in a residential accessory structure. The specific scenario involves the installation of a single-pole breaker in an 8-circuit MLO, or main lug-only, panel. Inspectors' concern is that because the panel has the capacity for 8 circuits, it potentially exceeds the 6 sweeps of the hand limitation outlined in the code, even though only one single pole breaker is currently installed. A counter-argument is that one cannot inspect for potential future violations and that the code may not even apply in this scenario. Let's break down the code section and its implications. National Electrical Code Section 225.33 addresses exceeding 6 switches or circuit breakers as a means of disconnect. The fundamental principle behind this rule is to limit the number of individual disconnects required to de-energize a building or structure. The code aims to provide a readily accessible and manageable means of disconnecting all ungrounded conductors supplying the building. The code language typically states that where a building or structure is supplied by a feeder or branch circuit, the disconnecting means shall consist of no more than 6 switches or 6 circuit breakers mounted in a single enclosure or on a switchboard. Essentially, this means that an individual should be able to disconnect all power to a building with a maximum of 6 movements of their hand. There are exceptions to this rule and specific conditions under which it applies. It is important to understand the scope and limitations of the code section to determine whether a violation has actually occurred. In this case, the panel has the capacity for 8 circuits. The inspector is arguing that this potential capacity triggers the six-handle rule, even though only one single pole breaker is currently installed. However, the argument against this interpretation is that one cannot inspect for a potential future violation. Code inspections are typically based on the present state of the installation, not on what it could become in the future. If the panel is currently wired with only one breaker, and that breaker is properly installed with the required hold down, then the installation complies with the code as it exists at that moment. The code states that it only applies to switches and circuit breakers rated over 60 amps. A standard single-pole breaker, such as a 15 amp or 20 amp breaker, falls far below this amperage threshold. Therefore, Section 225.33 would not be applicable to the installation in question. In the specific scenario, it's crucial to examine the panel's listing and labeling. The panel is listed for more than 6 sweeps of the hand unless all the breakers are double pole breakers. If the panel is indeed listed for more than 6 sweeps of the hand when single pole breakers are used, the inspector's argument gains strength. However, if the panel's listing allows for more than 6 single pole breakers, then the installation, with only one single pole breaker installed, is compliant. The presence of a single pole breaker in a panel listed for double pole breakers could be a violation, but this is a separate issue from the six-handle rule. The six-handle rule is focused on the total number of disconnects, not the type of breakers used. Furthermore, the applicability of the six-handle rule is dependent on the amperage rating of the breakers. Since the single pole breaker in question is likely rated below 60 amps, the code section does not apply. The core of the issue lies in the interpretation of the code and whether an inspector can cite a violation based on potential future modifications. Generally, inspectors are tasked with evaluating the current state of the installation against the requirements of the code. They cannot enforce regulations based on hypothetical scenarios. The inspector should only cite violations for the actual conditions observed during the inspection. In the absence of any other code violations, such as improper wiring or lack of required components, the installation of a single pole breaker in an 8-circuit panel does not inherently violate Section 225.33, provided the breaker is rated below 60 amps and the panel listing allows for the use of single pole breakers. Understanding the nuances of the National Electrical Code is critical for both electricians and inspectors. Proper interpretation and application of the code ensures electrical safety and compliance. In this scenario, the focus should be on the actual installation and the specific requirements of the code, rather than hypothetical future scenarios. The six-handle rule is not applicable because it applies to switches and circuit breakers rated over 60 amps, and the situation refers to 15 or 20 amp breakers.